There's no snow this year, just cold pavement, darker than usual. The streets are quiet, not in a peaceful way, more like a silence that doesn't want to be disturbed. No laughter, no music from the neighbor's porch. Just me, a chipped mug of black coffee, and the faint hum of the refrigerator as I sit by the window. It's Christmas Eve. I haven't put up a tree. There are no lights, no garlands, no cinnamon-scented candles. Just the steady presence of the card. That card. I've read it 100 times now, and each time feels like being slapped without warning. The card came in a plain white envelope last year. No return address, just his handwriting, sharp and slanted like he was always in a hurry. Inside, nestled, between a cheaply printed holiday greeting and a cartoon snowman, were the words, "Maybe if you spent less time trying to look generous and more time getting your life together, you wouldn't be alone this Christmas." No, thank you. No warmth, just venom disguised as seasonal cheer. I held it in my hands for hours that day, thinking there must be more. Maybe I missed a second page. Maybe it was a joke. But there was nothing else. Just those words. The kind you don't say unless you mean them. The kind you don't write unless they've been sitting inside you for years. Aaron wrote that. My little brother. The boy I used to defend in school when he cried after getting pushed around. The man I covered rent for when his youngest was born. The father I quietly funded through his third layoff so his kids wouldn't know what fear tasted. And that's how he saw me. A loser with a savior complex. I don't know what hurts more, the insult or the realization that he must have believed it for a long, long time. The card is still here. I didn't throw it away. I told myself it was to remind me not to be foolish. Again. But that's not true. I kept it because part of me still wanted to understand. Still wanted to believe that family doesn't just rot like this. I trace the ink with my fingers and feel nothing. No anger, not anymore. Just the ache of distance. The kind that doesn't measure in miles, but in memories lost and words you can't unsay. I lean back in the chair. The window fogs with my breath. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings once. Low, solemn, like a whisper. And just like that, I'm not in the room anymore. I'm somewhere else. Somewhere warmer. Somewhere with laughter. Back before it all cracked wide open. Aaron was 6 when Dad left. I remember the morning too clearly, how Dad didn't yell or slam a door. He just didn't come back from his night shift. One morning turned into a week into a month. By the time Aaron started asking where he was, Mom had already boxed up his boots and tucked away the wedding photos. I never got an answer. Either, not a real one. Just a tired shrug and, some men just don't know how to stay. Mom took on 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and cleaning offices at night. I was 12, old enough to know what silence between adults meant. Every day after school, I packed Aaron's lunch for the next day, helped with his homework, tucked him into bed. I became his father without anyone saying so. We were close in those days. I taught him how to tie his shoes and make microwave popcorn, without setting off the fire alarm. He followed me everywhere, even when I didn't want him to. His small hand in mine felt like a promise I didn't know I was making, one I'd keep long after childhood blurred into adulthood. When I got my first job at 19, I used half my paycheck to help Mom with rent and groceries. The other half? I set aside for Aaron's school supplies, field trips, whatever he needed to not feel the lack. I didn't expect thanks. I just didn't want him to feel how cold the world could be when it forgets you. Years passed. I moved out, but I was never really gone. I'd show up with groceries when Mom's back gave out, or transfer money when Aaron couldn't cover his textbooks. When he got married, I helped with the down payment on his house. When his first daughter was born, I gifted them a car. Nothing fancy, but reliable. He joked that I was more dependable than his job. At the time, I laughed. He had 2 more kids, and the pattern held. When the roof leaked, I paid. When they needed new furniture, I covered it. When he got laid off, twice, I made sure the lights stayed on. I watched my savings bleed out slowly over the years, but I told myself it was fine. He was my brother. I didn't have a family of my own, so maybe this was my way of building one. He never asked me directly for anything. That was the trick. He'd just sigh, mention something was tough, and I'd offer before he needed to say more. It became our silent transaction. He got to keep his pride, and I got to feel useful. Needed. I remember once, on a rainy Tuesday, I came by unannounced with a box of groceries. His wife looked surprised. Not grateful, just caught off guard. Aaron said, "You didn't have to." But there was no warmth behind it. No eye contact. That should have been a warning, but I brushed it off. Told myself people show love in different ways, that not everyone knows how to say thank you. I kept giving, kept showing up. And slowly, without realizing it, I wasn't his brother anymore. I was his safety net, a role I never auditioned for, but one I accepted without question. When the company folded, I didn't tell anyone right away. I'd worked there nearly a decade. One meeting, one memo, and just like that, I was holding a cardboard box in a parking lot, watching the building that had once given me stability blur behind a windshield smeared with winter slush. It felt surreal, like the life I'd built had been hollowed out overnight. But I didn't tell Aaron. Instead, I shifted money from savings, tightened my own belt, skipped meals, delayed health insurance, anything to make sure my monthly transfers to him didn't stop. His son was in his second year of college, tuition payments I'd quietly taken over after Aaron's last layoff. I didn't want the kid to feel the squeeze, or worse, drop out. When their old minivan gave out, I drained what was left of my severance to help them lease a new one. Not even a thank you from Aaron. Just a text with a picture of the keys and a thumbs-up emoji. I told myself he was busy. That stress made people forget their manners. But then came the roof. There was a storm, heavy winds. I got a call from Aaron, casual as ever. "Yeah, insurance is dragging its feet," he said. "Think you could spot me the cost? I'll pay you back next quarter." Next quarter never came, neither did the gratitude. I watched my account balance shrink while he posted photos of weekend getaways. "Well deserved," he captioned one, with his feet up beside a lakeside fire pit. I stared at the screen for a long time, then closed it. Still, I kept sending money, rent, groceries, a new laptop for his daughter. I convinced myself that it was the right thing to do, that this unspoken duty, was my role in the family. But the shift was subtle, almost imperceptible. Gratitude became silence. Silence became expectation. Expectation hardened into entitlement. He didn't say thank you anymore. He didn't check in to see if I was okay. He never asked if I needed anything, not even when he knew I was between jobs. It wasn't just the absence of kindness. It was the absence of curiosity. He never once said, "How are you holding up?" I realized slowly that to him, I wasn't a person with needs or limits. I was a service, a faucet he could turn on when money was low, a figure who existed on the periphery, dependable, invisible. One night, I stood in my own kitchen, the fridge nearly empty, calculating whether I could afford both rent and the next tuition payment. The silence in the room was loud, pressing in on me, and in that moment, I felt it. Not anger, not even sadness, just a quiet kind of emptiness, like a house where someone forgot to leave the lights on. I used to think sacrifice was noble. Turning down promotions that required relocation because Aaron's family needed me nearby. Skipping vacations because there was always a new expense, an unexpected dentist bill, school fees, a broken furnace. I even let a relationship die quietly once, because the woman I was seeing couldn't understand why I was always short on time, always stretched too thin, but I told myself it was okay. That family came first, that Aaron respected me for it. There was comfort in that illusion, that I was the strong one, the reliable one, the anchor. I let it define me. I wore it like armor, even when it started to feel like chains. Then came the Christmas loan. It was about a week before the holidays, and Aaron called me. No pleasantries, no small talk. Just, "I need 10 grand by Friday." His tone was so casual, like he was asking to borrow a sweater. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to help, but because I couldn't. I'd just started a new job, still catching up on rent I'd deferred, credit cards biting at my heels. My savings were nearly gone. I took a deep breath and told him the truth. I can't, Aaron. Not this time. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to twist. Then he laughed. A short, sharp sound. You've always made excuses, haven't you? I blinked, thinking I'd misheard. But he kept going. You act like some hero, like you've done so much. But let's be honest, you're just a loser hiding behind handouts. You like being needed. It's the only thing that gives you any worth. Something inside me cracked. It wasn't just the words. It was how quickly they came. How easily he said them, like they'd been waiting for the right moment to surface. Like this was how he'd always seen me. The call ended with him saying, "Don't bother coming for Christmas. We don't need the drama." I remember standing in my kitchen, the string of white lights I'd hung flickering slightly above the sink. A wrapped box of toys for his kids sat in the corner, half covered by my coat. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat down at the table, the quiet wrapping around me like a blanket made of glass, and for the first time, I let the truth settle. This wasn't a partnership. It had never been mutual. I had traded my life away for an illusion, and now the cost was finally clear. It came in at 10:42 p.m. I was lying on the couch, a blanket over my legs, the TV flickering soundlessly across the room. I hadn't spoken to Aaron since that phone call, since I said no. I thought maybe we'd cool off. Maybe a few days of silence would soften whatever cracked open between us. But then my phone buzzed. A long green bubble. No greeting. No hesitation. You're a bitter, broke loser who hides behind handouts and thinks that makes him noble. I read it once. Then again. The words were hot, mean, too sharp to be spontaneous. They didn't sound like someone lashing out in the heat of the moment. They sounded practiced, polished, like he'd been waiting for the day he could finally say them. Another message followed. You make yourself out to be a martyr, but we've all seen through it. You're not generous. You're just pathetic. And then, like a period at the end of a verdict. Don't come to Christmas. We're done pretending. I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. It was something colder than that. A slow settling, like dust on forgotten furniture. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The insults themselves didn't even hurt as much as the clarity behind them, the certainty. He hadn't typed them with trembling fingers. He hadn't hesitated before pressing send. This was how he really saw me. Maybe always had. The silence in the room shifted. Heavy now. Like something sacred had been broken and couldn't be mended. My eyes drifted toward the bookshelf. A framed photo sat there, dust collecting along its edge. It was from 6 Christmases ago. Aaron, his wife, the kids all in matching sweaters. I was in the back, holding the camera remote, smiling like I belonged. I picked it up, and for a moment, I thought about throwing it, but I didn't. I just turned it face down. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the sky outside thick with winter clouds. No stars. Just that kind of darkness that presses against the glass like it wants to come in. I didn't cry. There weren't any tears left. Just the realization that I'd spent years believing I was building something, a bridge between two brothers. A bond, but it wasn't a bridge. It was a leash, and I had never been holding it. I spent the next few days moving through my apartment like a ghost. The world outside kept turning. Car horns, distant laughter, the hiss of radiators warming other people's lives. But inside, it was just me, and the quiet reckoning that had been waiting too long to arrive. I didn't mean to open the drawer. It was one of those low ones, the kind you forget exists until your hands are searching for something else. Inside were crumpled receipts, old envelopes, printouts of wire transfers. The ink had faded on most of them, but I could still see the numbers. The dates. A $1,200 transfer labeled School Expenses. $800 for car repairs. $300 for Christmas dinner. Another for $2,000. No label. Just a note in the margin. For Aaron. I kept going. Birthday cards I'd written and never gotten responses to. An old invoice from a family photographer I'd paid when Aaron wanted one nice photo of the kids, but couldn't afford it. I remembered how proudly he'd posted it afterward, cropping me out of the frame. Each slip of paper felt like a gravestone. Not for the money, but for the parts of myself I'd buried quietly. Hopes deferred, boundaries ignored, needs silenced. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by these fragments of past generosity. They weren't trophies. They weren't badges of honor. They were proof of something else entirely. I hadn't been giving. I'd been erasing myself, piece by piece. Aaron didn't steal from me. He didn't manipulate me. I handed it all over willingly, telling myself it was love, loyalty, family. But really, it was fear. Fear that if I stopped, I'd lose what little connection I had. Fear that without my usefulness, I'd have no place in his world. I enabled him, not once. Not twice. For years. And sitting there, in that small circle of paper and regret, I finally saw it clearly. I was never the hero in this story. I was the supply line to someone else's comfort, and the cost had been my own peace. I hadn't seen Claire in almost a year. We used to grab coffee every few months, but life got in the way. She was the only one who ever gently asked why I was always footing someone else's bill. I'd always brushed her off with a tired smile. But now, I needed the truth. Not emotion, not guesses, just the numbers. She greeted me with her usual dry wit and a hug that lasted a second longer than normal. Her office was small but sharp, books lined the walls, and a desk so neat it almost looked untouched. I handed her the stack I'd gathered, bank statements, email confirmations, even printouts from the drawer I'd unearthed. Claire scanned the documents, flipping through pages with a quiet precision. I sat across from her, the weight in my chest growing with every minute of her silence. Then she leaned back. "Do you want me to be gentle?" she asked. I shook my head, she began. 10 years. That's how far back the pattern stretched. Every few months, Aaron had a financial emergency, a roof that needed fixing, a kid's tuition deadline, a sudden medical expense. And every time, I wired the money. No questions, no hesitation, but Claire started layering that timeline with his public records, credit statements, and social posts. That $3,500 I sent for a plumbing disaster? 2 days later, he and his wife checked into a resort spa in Lake Tahoe. The $2,000 I transferred to fix the car? That same week, he posted a photo of a new designer watch, still had the tag on it, and then she found it. Something I never would have thought to look for, a brokerage account, opened 5 years ago. Quietly, funded in small bursts, nothing flashy. But it had grown, significantly. The deposits lined up almost perfectly with the times I'd sent large sums. Claire looked at me, her eyes careful. "You didn't help him survive," she said softly. "You helped him build something he never told you about." I didn't speak. I couldn't. The betrayal had weight, but not the kind that crushed. It hollowed, like someone had scooped out parts of me I thought were still there. I thanked her, gathered the papers, and left. Outside, the air was cold. Not bitter, just clean. My breath came out in clouds as I walked to my car, the streets damp with melting snow. I turned the key and sat for a moment in the driver's seat, engine humming quietly. It wasn't the money that hurt. Not really, it was the deceit, the knowledge that while I was rationing groceries, skipping doctor visits, postponing my life to be his lifeline, he was stashing away comfort behind a curtain of lies. And somehow, he still had the gall to call me a loser. I didn't want revenge. Not the messy, dramatic kind. What I wanted was silence, clean and certain. The kind that follows a closed door when you know you won't open it again. So I began with the paperwork. It was quiet work, methodical. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd eaten alone at for years, and gathered what I needed. Bank account details, insurance policies, the modest will I'd drafted long ago when I thought Aaron would be the one to carry it forward. I rewrote it, line by line, removed. his name. Every trace. Reassigned the small inheritance, nothing grand but enough to matter, to a local charity that funds education for kids with single working parents. It felt right. Full circle. I cut off the auto transfers linked to his mortgage and phone bill. Each cancellation was like unfastening a buckle I hadn't realized was strangling me. No announcement, no warnings. Just the quiet undoing of a lifeline that had only ever flowed one way. But the hardest part wasn't the money, it was the letters. 3 of them. 1 for each of his kids. I wrote them by hand, not to poison their view of their father. I was careful not to do that, but to explain. To tell them gently that love doesn't always mean saying yes, that standing on your own isn't punishment, but preparation, that silence isn't cruelty when it's chosen for survival. I told them I had loved being uncle, that I would always treasure the times I showed up with gifts, laughter, and quiet support. But I also told them that boundaries are part of love too, that no one should be expected to bleed endlessly just to feel worthy. I sealed each envelope and placed them in the bottom drawer of my desk. For now, for someday, for when they're old enough to read between the lines. Then I sat back. The house was still. A kind of stillness that didn't ache. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me. Solid. Mine. I wasn't trying to hurt Aaron. I was just done carrying the weight of a brother who never once asked if I was okay. Who mistook silence for servitude and love for leverage. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. Rewriting the will wasn't just a legal act, it was a declaration that my life would no longer orbit someone else's need. Christmas morning came with no sound, no rustling paper, no footsteps down the hall, just a dim gray light slipping through the curtains, casting long, quiet shadows on the living room floor. I didn't bother making breakfast, no cinnamon rolls or coffee brewed for anyone else. Just toast and a candle I lit in the center of the dining table. The room felt both hollow and peaceful. Like a church long after the congregation has gone, Aaron texted me just after noon. Guess you finally know your place. 7 words, no Merry Christmas, no call. Just that message, waiting like a blade in my inbox. Sharp but predictable. Cruel but strangely small. I read it once. Locked the screen. Set the phone down without a word. There was nothing left to say. He didn't know it, but I had already left that conversation weeks ago. Instead, I sat by the window, my hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, watching as snow flurried outside. The world was hushed, and for the first time, that hush didn't scare me. It didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like clarity. Across the room, the chair I always used at his house, 3rd from the end, near the fireplace, was empty, not because I'd been uninvited, but because I'd chosen not to go. There's a power in that, I've learned, in choosing absence, in letting silence speak louder than confrontation ever could. By evening, I opened my laptop. I didn't scroll, or check messages. I didn't peek at family photos or sink into old habits. Instead, I opened a flight booking page, picked a random date. New Year's Eve, Iceland. The word sounded crisp on my tongue. A place I'd always said I'd visit someday. A someday I kept putting off in favor of someone else's emergencies. Not this time. I clicked confirm before I could overthink it. A single seat, 1 suitcase, no plans. It wasn't about escaping, it was about reclaiming. Later that night, I stood in the hallway, suitcase open on the bed, slowly folding sweaters into place. The candle had burned low, wax pooling beside the flame like melted time. This wasn't the Christmas I had pictured for most of my life, but maybe it was the one I needed, no obligations. No debts, no empty smiles stretched across old wounds, just one chair, and the quiet, beautiful truth that I was finally allowed to leave it behind. Time passed. Winter faded into a hesitant spring, then summer pressed its warm palms against the windows. The days stretched longer, quieter. I moved through them differently now, lighter, but more anchored. It's strange how silence, once so heavy, had become a kind of freedom. Aaron tried to reach out. The first message came in February. Something vague. Hey, just checking in. Hope all is well. I saw the notification and let it dissolve into the lock screen. March brought another. This time more direct. Do you have time to talk? It's important. I didn't. Then came April. I know things got weird, but the kids miss you. So does Nicole. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to discuss. Claire had warned me this might happen. She'd said cutting off the flow would sting him more than any confrontation. That without access to the well, he'd finally feel the drought. And he did. A mutual acquaintance mentioned in passing that Aaron had taken on extra hours, started selling off a few things. I didn't ask for details, but the signs were clear. The safety net was gone, and now he had to stand, or fall. The thing about quiet revenge is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't storm through doors or scream for attention. It just exits. And in that absence, the echo grows deafening. I didn't gloat. Didn't screenshot his texts or craft long speeches in the mirror. I just stopped. And that was enough. I spent more time outside, walking, reading. I started cooking again, real meals, not just sandwiches eaten over the sink. I even bought a plant, a stupid leafy thing I had to Google how to keep alive. It's still here, thriving somehow. Aaron's last message came in early June. You've made your point. Don't forget who's always been there for you. I read it once, then deleted the thread. Not out of spite, but closure. He had never been there for me. That was the truth, raw and simple. His dependence had been a leash I wore like a badge, mistaking servitude for purpose. And when I unclipped it, not in fury, not in vengeance, but in quiet resolution, I didn't break him. I revealed him, and in that space he left behind, I finally found myself again. Not as a brother, a fixer, a wallet, but just as me. Whole, unapologetically, free. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, creased like it had been opened and closed more times than it should have. His handwriting, still sharp, still leaning forward like it was always in a hurry, stared back at me from the corner of the page. I didn't open it. I'd read his words before. All the variations, the guilt-laced manipulations, the nostalgia, bait. The rewrites of history designed to tug at some piece of me that still remembered Christmas mornings and backyard birthdays. But that part of me didn't live here anymore. I stood on the balcony of a quiet cabin, high in the mountains. Snow, falling in soft spirals all around me. The air was cold and clean, the kind that bites your lungs but leaves your mind clear. There was a fire burning in the small stone pit below. I lit a match, touched the flame to the envelope's corner, and watched it curl. Paper blackening. Ink dissolving into ash. The smell wasn't quite smoke. It was something older. Like perfume gone sour. Like memory turning to dust. I let it burn. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need to carry it with me anymore. Behind me, a kettle hissed. I poured coffee into a chipped white mug, its handle warm from the stove. The bitter scent was grounding, familiar, mine. I stepped back out, mug in hand, the snow still falling quietly around me. No noise, no past clawing at my ankles, just the crisp sound of my breath, the distant trees heavy with frost, and the fire below, flickering like it had something sacred to protect. For a long time, my story had been about betrayal, about giving too much, being seen too little. Carrying someone else's weight while forgetting my own name, but standing there, miles above that old version of myself, I finally understood. This story isn't about what Aaron did, it's about what I chose after, the letting go, the quiet rebuild, the slow, deliberate act of choosing peace over proximity, wholeness over history. I smiled, not because I won, but because I walked away. And in doing so, I became something I hadn't been in years. Free.